Okay. Welcome back to another episode of A Dose of Reality. How are we feeling today, Michael?
We're good. You good?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, you look like you got more life, more energy today. You're bouncing.
I'm buzzing.
Yeah,
I'm buzzing.
Yeah. I see that. That's good. It's a daytime shoot as well. Last couple shoots have been late evening / nighttime. So.
That's probably why, because I like my sleep.
Yeah, I know that.
I'm more bouncy in the day.
Yeah, it's all right. We're children of the sun, so it's all good. Put that work in.
It's all good, but I'm excited today because it's Africa and the Rise Part 2, as promised.
As promised.
So yeah.
Yeah. So you're following through.
I am.
You're no longer a deceiver of the people.
Okay, well, you didn't have to say all that. But...
No, you make promises, you don't keep them. You're a deceiver of the people. That's just how it
Of
is.
the people.
Of
wow.
The people. Mm-hmm.
Wow. But I mean, I said Part 2. So be sure, everyone, to go and check out Part 1 if you haven't, because we're going to lead on from that. So yeah, it'll come up somewhere on the screen. But within Part 1, we spoke on Niger and Burkina Faso. A lot of positive things happening there. But also, we spoke on Congo. And, you know, although very sad and heart-wrenching, it's important to know what's going on there. Because it relates to the whole continent and everyone should be aware. So we're going to delve a bit more into those things. I say today we'll be speaking on the good, the bad and the ugly. Or the bad, ugly and the good, because we're going to end on a positive note.
Yeah, I like that. We're
going to end on a positive
Cycle it round
note.
that way. I like it.
Exactly. But there's a particular topic I want to start our episode off on, and I think it's a good springboard. So within Part 1, we also spoke on how we are going to liberate ourselves as an African people or people of African descent. And within that conversation, there's sort of two sides or a back and forth that's been going on over the years. So you find it in pockets often. And we've even been involved in conversations like that. So basically on one side, you have people who are like, well, it's us as African people or Black people who are holding ourselves back. And then on the other side, you have people who would say, well, no, what about what the Caucasians have done to us? They're holding us back because every time we try and do something, they sabotage us. So I thought it'd be good if you could bring some balance to that argument, perhaps some perspective.
Damn.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's an important conversation, no doubt, but it's nuanced, right? It's not black and white.
I see what you did there.
You see the pun already. I got the pun. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I think it's all about context, right? When it comes to race and racism, or race hate and things of that nature, I often, and I'm sure many of us do, I see extreme point of views within that conversation, or what you might determine as an extreme point of view. And extreme point of views are all well and good, but if they're not rooted in progression, then it will be non-progressive, if that makes sense. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes you hear people speak, just to lead on from what you're saying, you might hear someone say, it's all the white man's fault. It's all the Caucasians, it's white people, it's their fault, so on and so forth. And if those statements aren't accompanied with, but what we're going to do to save us, what we're going to do to help our progression ourselves, then that can become non-progressive. It can almost become sometimes energy misdirected, because if you're constantly doing that, then you might not be building for self, regardless of the truth, or regardless of whether it's true or not. If that's what you're focused on all the time, then you might not be building. But then you might see a different point of view that you might also consider extreme, and to me is a lot more detrimental, where you might have someone say, there's no racism anymore, it's all good, white people are fine now, it's all in the past, everyone treats everyone equally now, we should just all hold hands and dance around in a circle, everything's fine. And because the reality of the planet doesn't reflect that, that's a detrimental point of view, because it's non-progressive, because it renders you inactive, because you're like, everything's fine. regardless of what you're seeing around. And I've seen that perspective, often fueled by religion, but I've seen that perspective. So I think any perspective that you have, any conversation that you have, I think you're going to have different conversations in different contexts. As long as it's rooted in progression, then it can progress, if that makes sense. So in this particular conversation, I like to, personally, I kind of split it into two different contexts, if you like. You have what you might describe as an in-house conversation, where we're talking amongst our family, amongst our community, amongst our people, our race, whatever term you want to use. And within that conversation, the foundation has to be responsibility. It has to be it's on us. It has to be it's on us. Otherwise, we'll never progress, because no other group of people, no other race is going to wake up one day and say, Africans and those of African descent matter more to me now than myself or my people. No other group is going to do that. Our liberation is literally on us. That can't be denied. It is up to us to liberate ourselves. It's not. Baba actually mentions in, I think it's Interrogate to Integrate, book I mentioned on the first part. It's not even possible. No other race can liberate you anyway. By the nature of liberation. If you want freedom, if you want liberation, you have to take it. If anyone gives it to you, then that's not liberation. You're still reliant upon others.
Exactly.
If that makes sense. So the conversation that you're having in-house has to be rooted in responsibility in terms of how are we going to solve this particular problem? But it doesn't mean you disregard what's been done to us. In fact, it's paramount that you understand and overstand what has been done to us. And not only what's been done to us, why it's been done, how it's been done, and who it's been done by. Is paramount to that responsibility, because you can't solve it if you don't have the picture, if that makes sense. So you have that conversation in-house where you're like, oh, no, it's on us. We're going to solve it. But this is what's been done. We have to deal with the facts of the situation. We'll go on to that, in fact, because you mentioned Congo. And Congo is a great example. Very, very tragic what's gone on there. But it's been going on a long time. So we should, as a people, if we don't understand what's happening there, why it's happening, how long it's been happening, and who's doing it, then we failed ourselves, if that makes sense. If you don't understand what's going on over there, but you're chanting Free Palestine, we failed ourselves. We have to be conscious and plugged into our own people, if that makes sense. So we'll go on to that, but you have that conversation, you have in-house, it has to be rooted in responsibility. So I remember I've had the discussion before with people. I think we even had like a TikTok back and forth once. And we kind of put out that idea that, oh no, don't let ideas or psychological barriers that are present as a result of what's been done to us stop you from being who you're supposed to be. And what I was trying to say when we said that is that we all have our gift, we all have our purpose. And sometimes what happens is you knowing your gift, you knowing what you're supposed to do, because you'll perceive that the door is in your way, and that door might be called racism, you might not be as active in pursuing your purpose. And the point I was trying to make is whether that door is there or not, pursue it, because you're you and you're here to do what you're here to do, if that makes sense. And so it's that idea. So you have that conversation where it's like, oh no, okay, it's on us. It's our responsibility. But it doesn't negate what has been done to us. In fact, we need to understand that. And then you might have an outhouse conversation, so to speak, if that's the correct term. And if often online, sometimes they're serious, sometimes it's trolls, sometimes they're in denial, but you might see members of other groups or other races, particularly the Caucasians, come and say, no, this is you guys. You guys did this. It's on you. I'm tired of hearing your complaints and this, that, and the other. And sometimes when you hear them say that from their perspective, you got to tell them where to go. You got to tell them where to go, because what's been done and what they've done, whether it's them, their ancestors, their people, it's well documented and it has to be understood. And I think we live in an age of time where there's a lot of people, even our people, who don't even understand fully what's been done to us. So it's important. So on that note, you mentioned Congo, right? We're living in a day and time where Congo is being exploited for its resources. These days, it'll be copper,
coltan,
cobalt, resources like that, if that makes sense. But if you understand the story of Congo, you understand that it has always been very, very high in natural resources. Right now, we're dealing with those. Back in the era of the mass murderer, Leopold II, the so-called king of Belgium, you would have been dealing with resources such as ivory and rubber. But it's always been rich in resources. It's a very rich place in resources. And so when you understand the story of Congo, you understand that people look at it now, and if you didn't just wake up and Congo was in meltdown. This has been happening for a long time. So you can go back to Leopold and everything he did and how many millions of Africans he killed and was responsible for the deaths of. Way more than the Jews. And the Congolese didn't get a country out of it like the Jews have. We haven't broken down the
we still need to go
Palestine
into that,
situation.
the whole history
of
Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, exactly. So they didn't get anything out of that, and it's not publicized. But many, many more people than than died in the Holocaust, for example, died in Congo. Congolese people died in the millions, huge numbers, right? So you had Leopold. Then you go up to, and then you say, okay, that's then. Congo's destabilized. They're fighting for their independence. Then you come up to the time of Patrice Lumumba, right? Very important time. If people don't know the story of Lumumba, Prime Minister Lumumba, learn it. Go back and research. There's plenty out there on Lumumba. And the reason that he was so important was because obviously he was fighting for Congolese independence, right? This is what I always want us to remember. When he was fighting, he came to power, okay? He was charismatic, he was doing his thing, and he was a Pan-Africanist, right? And he wanted Congolese independence and Congolese control of its land and resources and people, okay? Nothing unreasonable, right? Okay? These wants, or this agenda, obviously is not going to suit the Belgian people who would have colonized, right, and taken advantage of the resources, and it's not going to suit the West in general, including the US, right? So you have a situation there where Patrice Lumumba is assassinated, right? Kidnapped, tortured, and assassinated. When you go back and you read these stories, you have to read them, you have to be prepared sometimes, because some of what's been done to us is appalling. It's appalling. Brutal. It's brutal.
And to read on that, you just get up. You get upset. Really upset.
Right.
And you have to be prepped for that.
You have to be prepped for that, which is why I overstand the mentality, or when I say overstand, I overstand both mentalities. But if I go back to the example I mentioned before, where you have some people who will get in that mindset, we're like, oh, it's all their fault. The white people, they've done this, they've done that. I get it. Because when you come into knowledge and you come to learn what's been done to us, at some point along the line, you're going to feel upset. You're going to feel angry.
It's infuriating.
And there you go. And so, but then I also, on the other side, understand the delusion or the deluded mentality where you're like, no, it's all fine. Everything's fine. It's okay. Racism, that's in the past. Everything's good now. Everyone's okay. Because such is the pain of what's been done to us. Either you're going to get angry or you're going to get deluded because you can't deal with it, if that makes sense. But you need to come away from both. I've always feel like I can work more with the person who's angry, if that makes sense. Because I can bring if you're angry and you're directing hate, I can bring you. I feel like we can bring those people towards but remember, regardless of what's been done, we're people of life, love and soul. So we need to be aware of it so we know how to move forward, but we're going to do things our way and we don't move as others move, okay? When we are gods, not devils, if that makes sense. So we move in a certain way, but we need to be aware of it. The delusion mentality is sometimes very difficult to work with because you can't even get through to them, if that makes sense, such as the spell of religion and faith and so on and so forth. So you have those two sides, but I understand it. So when you go back and you read about, and I use Patrice Lumumba as an example because we're talking about Congo. When you go back and read the story, it's highly upsetting. And so he's kidnapped, he's tortured, he's assassinated. Everybody knows Belgium had something to do with it. Everyone knows the West had something to do with it. Belgium have apologized in the years since for their involvement, but they say their involvement. So short of just saying, yeah, we did it. Yeah, we was involved and we're sorry. The US haven't apologized, right? But it's become abundantly clear that they were involved, even to the point where CIA papers have been put out. There's a particular project. I can't remember the project name. Maybe we'll get the editor to throw it up on screen if I don't remember it. But there's a particular project where the CIA acknowledged in their papers and whatnot that they went into Congo for a specific mission, and they were heavily involved in turning Lumumba over to his enemies. So you have the US, you have the Belgium, all involved in Lumumba's death. And the reason that is significant is because you look at Congo now and you ask the question, how did it come to be in this state? And the answer is very simple, because it suits these nations for it to be in that state. Because Congo is so rich in resources that if the Congolese people control those resources, Congo and the Congolese people will very quickly be amongst the richest people on the planet. Like that. If they control the resources are so crucial to the modern world or to the Western world that if they controlled those resources, they would be amongst the richest people on the planet like that, if that makes sense. And the West, they overstand this. So it's not an accident that Congo is in the state that it's in. Meanwhile, it's in such a bad state, but somehow the West and everywhere else who's developing their technology are still getting hold of those resources to continue making their technology. In such a bad state, but somehow they still get those resources. So you have to understand it's in that state by design, right? No matter what they say, no matter what they try to pretend, no matter they say, oh, but that was back then and this is happening, it doesn't matter. It's in that state by design. And so what happened is that it was in a very similar state. Patrice Lumumba rose up amongst his people. I'm not saying singularly only him, but rose up amongst his people and said, no, we need to control our country. And so the West, the Caucasians, or those of the European seed, plotted and killed him. And how many times can we repeat that story? Right?
We can.
How many times can we repeat that story? It can be repeated. It has been repeated many, many times. And so it's important to know that and understand that. Because and this is why I always say you have to be aware of the bigger picture and not your interpersonal relationships. So, and I probably said this on part 1, I've said it before. In the West, we interact with all different kinds of people over here, right? But you mustn't let that blind you to the realities of how your people, African people worldwide, have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed, and how it's fundamental to the lifestyle of the Western civilization. It's funny, I was reading a book, Civilization. Baba was breaking down civil lies. It's all lies. They're not civilized. It's just civil lies, okay? Because they're brutal, no matter whether that brutality is open or in the shadows or under pretense or under the guise of a uniform or an army. They're always brutal, if that makes sense. But Western civilization is benefiting off the oppression of Africans, and not the planet itself is benefiting off the oppression of Africans, and at the very least the gifts of the Africans that we don't benefit off ourselves, if that makes sense. So you have to learn these stories, do some research into Lumumba, do some research into Sankara or Burkina Faso, because we have right now Ibrahim Traore, very similar to Sankara, very similar ideals. So we're seeing presently someone rising up right now and saying, no, we need to control our land, if that makes sense, in terms of the Burkina Faso. But learn the Lumumba story. Learn about some of the Pan-Africanist leaders who have tried to take back control in some way or give Africa more control, and research what's been done to them.
Yeah, similar story with Thomas Sankara.
There you go.
Similar story.
There you go. So this type of thing is done often, and it's deliberate. Now, one thing we always emphasize is that Africans, we are connected to our home continent, and we always will be. And so until the continent is free, we're not really free, no matter where we are on the planet. And that applies to all people. Your home continent has to be free and powerful. And then the individuals, no matter where you go, will carry that power with you, if that makes sense. So your home nation has to be that power base. And right now, although, as you said, we're going to go into the positive signs, if you do your reading and you actually learn what's been done in the African continent, you'll see that it's no wonder we're in such a state worldwide. Now, that doesn't erase, that is joint with the idea that it's on us, if that makes sense. And within these stories, you can't ignore the fact that often a crucial piece in the West or the Caucasians or the Europeans doing whatever they do to us is that they manage to turn us against each other. That can't be ignored. When you go through the stories, at some point, you're always going to see, oh, wait, but there was also infighting. So we can't ignore that, if that makes sense. But we need to understand and really come to knowledge on these stories, on why these things are being done, And so when people come to you and try to convince you that it has nothing to do with them, or it has nothing to do with the US, or it has nothing to do with the West, no, it's by design, and they've put it into place and they're benefiting off it. And you will be able to tell, because the moment that someone rises up and says, nope, this is going to change, they start plotting. Oh, we got to take that person out. If that makes sense. And so that's what's happened a lot on the African continent. But it also happens on Western shores, so to speak. And so you can't forget as well, a lot of what's happened in the United States. I think Black Wall Street is an important story that everybody needs to make sure they know. Because there you had, because we speak about the fact that, is it on us? And then you spoke about the other point of view, that every time we try to do something, they sabotage or they come for us. And it's a natural fact. And Black Wall Street is a perfect illustration of that, right? What was Black Wall Street but businesses, entrepreneurs, self-sustenance, Black people coming together to say, yeah, this is us. We've got our businesses, we've got our banks, we've got our hospitals, we've got our grocery stores, so on and so forth. We've got what we need as a community to survive. Okay, we ain't got no weapons. We're no threat to anyone. We're not coming to colonize you. We're just over here in our little small thing over here,
minding our business,
doing what we do. And that frightens them. It frightens them. And so they burn it down. So read that story. Again, when you read it, you're going to be upset. Because you're going to come to see that, oh, wait, no, it's a fact. It's a fact that every time we are rising, they will come for it, because they know that our rise means their fall. That's just the dynamics of nature. So this is where we always switch. And I know I'm going on a bit, but this is where we always switch to the spiritual science that Baba Yaanuwn breaks down. In who you are, not what you accept, and interrogate to integrate. He makes it clear. It's just very clear. He says, by nature, if you go beyond just what we see on a practical level and look at us spiritually, we are people of the sun. We are people of life. We are people of soul. We were the first people. So we have to have our opposites, our spiritual opposites, which will manifest physically. And when that happens, if we are people of life, then your opposites will be people of death. That's just nature. That's duality. That's opposites, right? And so that's why we've seen so much death, if that makes sense. Because we're living in a rule and age of time where that particular force has manifested. And it always would. It always will to some degree, if that makes sense. But yeah, when you look at the stories, you begin to understand, no, anytime we try and really rise, they come for us. And in between doing that, they might give you some rights. They might give you the right to vote. They might give you the right to go into any restaurant you want. They might give you the right to earn, some of you, the right to earn millions.
Give you rights that don't really mean anything in the scale of things.
That don't mean anything in the scale of things. But the moment you try to rise as a people, so you're there with those rights, like, yeah, things have changed, things got better. But when you really analyze it, has it? No, it can't get better by way of them or any other group of people. It can only get better by way of us, if that makes sense. And so we're coming into, when you deal with the spiritual science, we're coming in as people of the sun. We're coming into a sun cycle, right? Which means that our powers are rising, which I'm sure we're going to go on to what that means practically, if that makes sense. But it means it's our time. So things that were immensely difficult in previous ages, it's not even to say they'll become easier, but it is our time. So what we do, if we plug into our spiritual forces, if we plug into our culture, it will work in this time, because it's our time, literally. But we have to plug in, we have to wake up, if that makes sense. But an important part of that waking up is knowing what's been done, knowing the realities, if that makes sense. And so it's always sort of one-dimensional. It's usually a one-dimensional conversation, and it's usually slavery. Like slavery. No, you have to really look at the history, not just the history, but the present day activities of what's taken place. And just because you're given certain freedoms, and for our audio listeners, I'm using double quotes again.
Yeah.
Just because you're given certain freedoms, it doesn't mean that your people are free. You have to look at the home continent. You have to look at real practical things in order to determine whether your people are free. And until Africa is free, we can't be free, if that makes sense. But we are on the rise, and that rise cannot be stopped, if that makes sense. And if you haven't watched the episode Fall of the West, go and watch that episode, because that fall cannot be stopped either. Okay, so there's interesting things happening in this time, but I just always think it's pertinent to make sure you've done the research and you read the stories and you know exactly what's happened and what's been done to stop it. Because every time something happens, they're in there. No, we got assassinations. We got to take that person out. We got to kill that person. We got to kill that person's character. We haven't even spoken about Tamare and what they've done to us. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a whole episode.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to do a whole episode on that. And it's so the moment that you, even if you're in your own space, just doing your own thing, minding your own business, living your culture, living your way of life, supporting yourselves, living off for and by each other, that's a threat to them. And so don't let them ever tell you it's not. Because if it really wasn't, they would leave us be.
Exactly that. And that's what comes to mind. Even that what they fear most is, one, us being self-sufficient. Two, when leaders talk about us going back to Africa, or their focus is on Africa, that scares them the most.
Yeah.
That scares them the most.
That terrifies them. And it's deep as well, because it's a love-hate relationship. I think I've said this before as well, but if you read those books, literally the ones I'm mentioning, Interrogate to Integrate, Baba explains it's a love-hate relationship because they really hate us. They're jealous of us, but they understand they can't live without us. The symbology of the fact that, again, spiritual sciences that sometimes people aren't fully aware of the meaning. We're children of the sun. They're children of the moon. Literally, the sun has its own light. The moon reflects that of the sun. Won't have any light unless the sun is there, if that makes sense. And that's literally what you see on the planet. They need us around, whether it's for our soul, whether it's for our creativity, or whether it's for our blood and our genes. They need us around. So we've spoken about how their genes are weakening. We spoke, the other day, what did we see? Birth rates, because I, again, watch Fall of the West. I explained the birth rate situation.
Fall of the West, but I'd put an article in our group chat. Yeah, they're like, birth rates in Europe are scarily low. Yeah. Especially in Greece. There are certain villages where they haven't recorded births in years.
Yeah, that's wild.
In years.
They need to, I don't know, play some Marvin Gaye. Someone needs to get it on. So how can you not be having no children in years?
In years. And, you know, their narrative very much within these articles is they're put it down to the cost of living. People can't afford children. So they're trying to put things in place to encourage that. But to that, I say, no, doesn't really make sense. Some of the poorest countries in Africa, when we talk about the people, the everyday living, but the birth rates are booming.
Yeah, booming. Because Marvin Gaye's playing in those towns.
So they will have their narratives, but within that, and I'll probably put that article in the description, but watch Fall of the West, because Amakhu eloquently breaks down the birth rates.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Which is an important factor, and a factor to note with all this, because as you said, you can't rule the world if you don't exist.
No, you can't.
And that's where it's heading.
That's where it's heading, and that's where it's going fast. And so to continue the point, so they have a love-hate relationship with us, which is why, because they know they need us around, that's why they're terrified of us being elsewhere, just doing our thing, which means whenever we're doing that, they will come. And that's the reality of what we're seeing, whether we go back to conquering, colonization and bondage, slavery, or we deal with what's happening in present times, if that makes sense, or we deal with things like Black Wall Street or Tamare. Anytime we're doing what we're doing and just prospering ourselves, they will come. That's what they do. And so that's the reality. And they know they need us around, you know. But in the same book, Baba speaks of how it's us that really give life to their religions, to them and their gods and so on. So it's us that bring the soul to their activities. And so they need us around. And then genetically, obviously, they need us around as well because their genes are weaker. So they need to mix in every so often to survive. But mixing too much, and they'll be mixed out of existence. So it's a two-sided, it's a double-edged sort of situation where they're like, what do you do? But they have to keep us around, and such is their nature, they have to make sure we're oppressed and subjugated when we're kept around. They have to be in control and in charge and dominating and conquering and colonization. They have to be in control. That's their nature. And so when you overstand that, you realize that a crucial piece of the puzzle in us taking responsibility for that is overstanding that fact. That nature won't change. So until you start kicking them out, what we're seeing in these African countries, and saying we're controlling us and our resources, you can't ever be free. This idea of that religious mentality of holding hands in a circle and we don't see color, it doesn't help us.
Or even like, not to say it's not a valid argument, but the idea of reparations is just no point waiting around for them to say, you know what, we're going we're going to pay you back for all we did for you. It's just no point.
Have
they shown any sign they're ever going to do that?
No sign. And that's why I say you bring up the Jews and go into the history there. Maybe we'll do a segment later on today so that we can throw that out in the week. The history there.
Yeah, I'll let you, something's pertinent. Well, I'll let you finish and then I'll mention.
Yeah. And you can't. It doesn't matter whether it's, that's what people get caught up on. They get caught up in the right and wrong of it. Is it right that we get reparations or is it wrong? And they'll be like, it's right, of course it's right. And you get caught up in that. No, if step away from the what's right and wrong, what is reality? Okay? Reality is you cannot wait around for another group of people to grant you your freedom, regardless of how you got there. Okay? You can deal with the blame and the realities and what happened, yes. But regardless of how you got there, you can't wait around for them. You have to do for self. We have to do for self, and believe me, we are capable. And so it's that time. But amongst doing for self, you have to understand who they are and what's been done. It's not about your interpersonal relationships with Jackie or Casper. It's not about that. It's about the relationship between the people on a global scale. And Africa is a fundamental part of that equation. You have to look there and really observe and say, what's going on? And that will tell you how the Europeans feel about the Africans, not your little friendships here and there.
It's so true. You have to take a wide scale view. People think because in their day-to-day lives they're perceiving that they're not experiencing racism, that it's no longer an issue. But if things were currently operating fairly, as that goes, things would be fair.
Yeah. There you go.
The continent of Africa, people wouldn't be suffering and starving.
There you go. But they're not going to want that, because that's when you're going to get the reality of nature and we become who we are, which is the original people of the planet and the world's parents, shall we say. And so they're not prepared to accept that. But yeah, he was going to make another point.
Yeah, just as you was talking, pertinent things came to mind. Just on the research part, even if we talk about, because you spoke about Black Wall Street, Tamare, other things to research, Lake Lanier, the story of Lake Lanier, that was another thriving town. That's literally a lake now. It was destroyed and submerged underwater. Also, more commonly known one, the story of the Black Panther Party and Fred Hampton and how a setup was done there. So those are things to research. And then also on the side of speaking on Congo, because earlier we were talking about, we're going to go into the history of Palestine and Israel. It's important to point out that Israel does also benefit from the exploitation of Congo and the minerals. And interestingly enough, there was a video the other day, because even on the fact we're speaking of our own are often used against us. So the president of Rwanda, I guess it was some sort of conference, he was speaking on it because Western forces have been able to use allies in Rwanda to funnel minerals through Rwanda to get it to themselves.
To obtain them.
So the president of Rwanda was speaking on this and he was like, yeah, maybe resources are being funneled through us, whether legally or illegally. But to summarize it, he was saying, don't blame me. Don't ask me about it. Ask about the people it ends up with. Ask the US or Russia, whoever's benefiting from these sales.
Right.
So
what's your take on that?
My take it is absolutely, you absolutely have to bear some responsibility. I get it, because ultimately these other countries benefit, but it's that whole thing we talk about, we have to be unified for this ever to stop. If you as a country of Rwanda say, no, I'm going to stand by my neighbouring countries, us as an African continent, we're going to stand by each other, how quickly would things stop?
There you go.
So you got me talking about, don't ask me about it.
Yeah.
I was like, that's crazy to me.
It's my country, but I ain't really seen that. Like, I was eating. You have to.
What's crazy to me is he acknowledged it. Yeah, illegally or illegally, it's being funneled through. But ask about the people it ends up with. Don't ask me about the funneling.
Yeah. What I would say is that now's the time. Now's the time to to act right as a people. Now is the time to align ourselves with each other. If in this time you are aligning yourself with anybody else other than your own, you are defining yourself. This is the moment. This is that point in the timeline where it's going to be like, who did you choose? What did you choose? Did you choose to support your neighbors, Burkina Faso and Niger? Or did you choose to support the West, Nigeria? What did you choose? And so that's pertinent.
Pertinent.
Yeah, so we got to take responsibility.
People seek out that video. A source I'm finding is good at relaying, what's going on across the continent is a page called African Stream. Also, another page called Authentic African. They have a partnership where they go live every Monday and just breaking down all the stories going on across the continent. So that's very good. There's a reporter who works for African Stream called Inem, and she's very good at breaking down the stuff, very knowledgeable. And also African Insider is another page. I'm just finding them helpful if people want to seek out the research for what's going on the continent.
Valuable. It's the time of the African female.
It is.
I want to throw that out there as well. It is the time of the African female. African women are going to become who they are again.
Yeah. Right? Sharp, intelligent.
There you go.
And funny enough too, she's in Burkina Faso. That's where she's living. And then the other guy there, he's Sierra Leonean heritage, but between Sierra Leone and Ghana. So it's people actually on the continent reporting on what's happening.
And it's good to have us there. It's very, I just commend them as well, because it's important for us as well, Africans in the diaspora, so to speak, to have that connection or have our own reporting on the situation. Because one thing we've always emphasized, you cannot trust the Western media outlets, right? So if we can have people over there who we can look at and say, you know what, it seems like they're genuine, seems like they're really telling us what's going on, then that's hugely beneficial. So I think it's very important what you point out there. Point out some helpful links that we as a people can look to for our research, so that we actually have somewhere to go. So when we're telling people, read up on this country, check on what's going on there, watch what's going on there, you actually have somewhere to go and do that. That isn't always BBC, BBC,
The Independent, CNN, or whatever.
Exactly. So now it's fundamental to make. So I'll let you continue, but it's fundamental to understand that they have a role in all the conflicts and violence that you see on the planet. They have a role in it, and they have a benefit to it. Whether we're talking about Congo or anywhere else in Africa, whether we're talking about Haiti, wherever we're talking about, trust me, they have a role in it. And so don't ever think that they're innocent, or that it isn't by their design or by their disasters or by their way, if that makes sense. That's their nature, and that's the nature of this era that we're going through whilst we were under them, if that makes sense. Not under them, but whilst they had their energies, had their time to rule, if that makes sense. So here we are.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
To our Africa and the rice section.
Yes, let's do that.
Yes, so I think we've summarized well, and of course people have to do their further research. But everything we previously talked about. So now we want to talk about, some things going on the continent that point to Africa being on the rise. So I just put together some headlines, so we'll work our way through them. Okay, we all may have seen this last month. Niger asked the US military to bounce from their country. It's like, you all need to bounce.
You all need to leave right now.
So yes, Niger asked US to leave. So on March 16th, Niger said it has revoked with immediate effect a military accord that allows US military personnel and civilian staff on its soil. They called the US presence on their soil illegal. So you can search that out. The spokesperson for Niger, he had done a conference, I guess. So important things to know is about 1,000 US military personnel are stationed in Niger in a 110 million drone base in Agadez in central Niger. So this is like...
Is it 110 million, the drone base, 110 million, was that the cost of it?
Yeah, the
Okay,
cost.
so
Sorry,
100
did I not say that?
And that 110
yeah, they
million
spent
worth.
$110 million to produce,
To build that drone
construct
base
that drone base.
in Niger.
Yeah. So I think it's like either one of or the biggest drone base on the continent of Africa. $110 million went into building it.
It's interesting because they always come with the story of oh yeah, we're trying to help the poor over there and we're trying to fix the situation and whatnot. But you got 110 million to spend on weapons. Seems like your priorities are in a different place, if that makes sense. So that's interesting.
And it gets more interesting. So I guess the US forces were there under the guise of having a mission to help the Nigerian forces combat terrorism, along with the French, who they told to bounce last year, September.
Yes.
They asked the French to leave. At first, they refused, and then they left in December. So they got.
Yeah, we covered that, right?
Yeah, we covered that. So I linked that video. So they were meant to be there helping battle these Islamic insurgents who are just causing havoc, especially across the Sahel region of West Africa.
So the US troops were supposed to be there to help, or the French troops were supposed to, or both?
Both. But their main partnership was with the French, but then the US were there under the guise, we're going to help with that. Right. Just need $110 million drone base to help with
some
that.
of your natural resources too, might be. Yeah.
So Niger is now exploring new defense partnerships. And it's interesting because if you watch some coverage on the US reaction, they're like, this is the Russians' fault. They've turned Niger against us and they're trying to get in there to be the new security partners. Because I think recently they did have a meeting with Russia. You know, they're just exploring their options. So the leader of Niger through the military takeover, his name is President Tchiani. So he may have had a meeting. So they're exploring who they want to partner with. But then it's also important to note that Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso formed an alliance called AES, I believe. The Alliance of Sahel States. And they exited the West African bloc, ECOWAS. We remember that.
Yes, we remember that.
But yeah, they have an alliance to help fight these insurgents, Islamic insurgents across the Sahel region.
That's good. That's good that they've allied themselves with each other. As far as, I don't know if you're going to say more about Russia, but it's an interesting perspective in it because some people will be looking like, are you just going away from one?
Yeah, which I was going to get
to the
into,
other, that will do the same thing to you. It's an interesting one.
It's an interesting one. I was going to get onto it more because it's interesting.
Yeah, I'll let you get there.
But,
I'll let you go there.
Funny enough, so this announcement asking the US to leave was made on March 16th last month. A week prior to that, US officials had visited Niger, and what Niger stated in their address is that they were given no notice of this visit. They just turned up and they were saying that's illegal. Like it's against policy to just show up that without organizing anything.
Yeah. I feel bad enough when I'm at my house and I hear the doorbell ring and I got to scramble like, oh, who's that? Yeah, so I understand that. I get that. It's the arrogance though, isn't it?
It's the arrogance.
It's the arrogance to just turn up like, this is our place.
Exactly that. Yeah. So the vibe we're getting from this meeting is that the US officials came in with some arrogance and basically their agenda there was to warn Niger against partnering with Russia. They were like, there's going to be consequences if you do that. Damn. And then they also threw out accusations of, we feel you're selling minerals to Iran.
Okay.
Which is interesting. Which Niger totally denied. They said France still controlled the majority of mining and you're going to accuse us of making these sales. Take that up with France. So Niger, a statement by their spokesperson in part said, Niger regrets the intentions of the American delegation to deny the sovereign Nigerian people the right to choose their partners and types of partnerships capable of truly helping fight against terrorism. Also, the government of Niger forcefully denounces the condescending attitude accompanied by the threat of retaliation from the head of American delegation towards the Nigerian government and the people. So yeah, they were highly offended by America's attitude.
Yeah, I understand that.
But America, this is where they always play themselves. They come in with this arrogance.
Right.
And this notion of you have to choose between us or Russia is really what is now pushing them out of the door. Because Russia ain't said nothing about you have to choose.
Yeah, there you go.
It's the sheer arrogance of the American government of like, how could you be considering anyone other than us? You got to choose.
Yeah.
So they're like, all right, Biden.
Yeah. And so, but it's a different time. So your arrogance isn't going to last, isn't going to carry you forever, if that makes sense. It's an interesting one because you'd very much, if you're coming from an African perspective, you'd very much like it to be that it's just purely us, separate to anyone else, whether it's the US or whether it's Russia or whether it's China. You would like us to be able to build up. Obviously, we're not in those seats. And so you might have to deal with realities where you might have to make certain decisions or deal with the lesser of, if that makes sense, and say, well, okay.
Or the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, I was like, should I finish that? Lesser of two. And say, we don't know the seat. If that makes sense. So we don't know what decisions, how they have to navigate in order to make their decisions. What we do know is that you do have to get away from the West. That's 100%.
That much is clear. And so what you do from there is difficult. It's an interesting one. We saw the same thing. We saw Ibrahim Traore. We spoke about that last year. But he was making his speech and he had that Russia-Africa. Yeah, the Russia-Africa summit in where he made a speech
that
would have taken place in Russia, I believe.
There you go. So Russia's approach is more nuanced than the West, isn't it? They're approaching it with, it seems, a little bit more humility.
a little more class.
A little bit more class. So the US are still coming in like, listen, we're the best. You should listen to us because we're the best. And the people are like, no, when you observe this, you're not the best. And you kind of haven't been for a little while now. And so that's what's happening, if that makes sense. So interesting, very interesting.
So yeah. Obviously, the US have been asked to leave. It's still, it's quite recent, so it's up in the air what's going to happen. There's been murmurs that there's a proposal the US are presenting to Niger of how they will depart. So we'll get into that once there's more solid info on that. But should they have to leave, this will be a huge blow for the US. And there's a clip of a hearing in which his name is General Langley. He's like the general commander of AFRICOM, which is like the African-American partnership.
Is this someone from the US or someone from Africa?
Someone from the US. So this hearing took place in the US, sorry.
Got you.
So since this General Langley is sort of like the go-between.
He's the correspondent, right?
He was getting questioned within this hearing by a guy called Matt Gaetz, who's furious. Apparently, Matt Gaetz is known for... he's the same guy who showed pornographic pictures within Congress or something like that. I don't know.
That really happened?
Yeah.
That's wild. So that Key and Peele sketch that they did with the senator that couldn't control himself taking pictures of it, that was real?
That's what I heard.
That's wild.
That's what I heard he's known for. But
that's wild.
Anyway, he was making quite the scene in this hearing. He's just like, you just have to watch the clip. But he's questioning Langley, who's a black guy, by the way. But he looks very patriotic, is the kindest I could say.
Yeah.
But some of us described him as a coon.
I understand what you're saying. I got you. When you said patriotic, I knew exactly what you meant. I had a picture in my mind now of the fella. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this Matt Gaetz is questioning Langley, and he's like, what's going on? Seems we're just training people to do coups. Because, they go over there to train the military. And then he just has this outburst, Matt Gaetz, of saying, we've spent 500 million in this country of Niger, and what do we have to show for it? What do we have to show for it? They're kicking us out by the scruffs of our neck. We have to abandon the base, this and that. Russia's taking over security partnership. He's going off. And interestingly enough, what some pointed out that, well, he's showing Americans' agenda because it's really about all the money they've invested and what have we benefited off. There was no discussion of well, have we succeeded in protecting the people as we were there to do?
As we were dared to do. I'm doing the double quotes again.
As we were there to do, because actually through the contract, they weren't required to say why they were there. Yeah, they weren't required to give no updates about what they were doing.
So you see how these so-called leaders are selling out, or were selling out to the West. And so it's fundamental to what's taking place there. So if they come in with their brutality first and then they install their puppets in there, you may see the absence of their brutality in the picture for a period of time. But any brutality that's taking place, or anything that's being abused, or any lands that are being abused, what's the word? When you the word will come back to me, but when you use the land or use the resources, the word will come back to me.
Escapes me.
Yeah, it'll come back to me. But anytime you see that, just because you're not seeing the present activity of their brutality, it doesn't mean that their brutality isn't there. They put things in place, which is why you always have to trace the story back.
Extorting?
Extorting, so there's still another word. So we used it earlier today. Exploiting. I knew you had me. Took a few more seconds than I would have preferred, but I knew you had me. Exploiting the lands, right? Everything has been put in place. So what sometimes people look at is they look at the picture of the last 5, 10, 20 years and they say, but it's all them. No, trace the story back to its origin. Find out who signs these contracts over. Find out the deals that have been made. Find out where the resources are going. Find out what they really want, which the guy who was going off on Langley told you what it's really about for the Americans. Make sure you know the story, because I guarantee you they've done it. At some point in the timeline, they've done it. And then they kind of step back, or even come back to the mess they made and say, yeah, we need to solve this. We're going to go over there and we're going to help the people. But then you see the reason why they go over there. So never be fooled.
Which is important to point out, since the presence of the French and the US, or the West in general, within the Sahel region, since their presence has been there to apparently help with it, Islamic violence has increased.
So it's going backwards.
Since their presence.
They're doing the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. That's wild.
Yeah. That's wild. Terrorism has increased.
That's wild.
Within West Africa. So they're clearly not doing their mandate.
No.
So the arrogance to think you should be able to stay even though you're not doing what you're meant to achieve. You're not fixing the problem.
It's typical.
It's typical.
It's typical.
So yeah, I think that one interesting one. We'll see how it progresses.
Yeah, keep an eye on it.
Yeah, they're just saying we just got to shed the West. So we'll see how that happens. And really, the another thing people point out is they look down on Africans as if they're not capable of making their own decisions. So now they're trying to push the narrative of, it's got to be the Russians dictating things now. They got in the Nigerians' ear. And now they're dictating what's going on and telling them to part ways with us. Yeah. As if these leaders are not capable of making their own decisions and assessing things.
Yeah, exactly. So condescending is probably the most polite word you could use for what takes place.
Exactly that. So that's that on US asking Niger to leave. Niger asking US to leave, rather. So our next headline, it's probably been the biggest one lately, from prisoner to president, or from prisoner to palace, as they say. Senegal. Senegal. So Bassirou Diomaye Faye, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, Senegal's new president. So what's been happening in Senegal is there's been a lot of political unrest for maybe the past. It's been at its height for the past 3 years. So a lot of protests, a lot of fear that the president who would have been in place before the current president was going to manipulate things to get another term. So his name was Macky Sall. He's very much viewed as a puppet president. And what happened is the election just took place in March, I think March 24th. And then this new president, Faye, has been appointed April 2nd, I think. So the election was supposed to take place in February, but Macky Sall had got it postponed. He was trying to get it postponed to December, but he got overruled. It's like, nah, sort this out. So then he stepped down from running for another term. And yeah, so I'll fast forward through it. I encourage people to go research the story.
But some of it you go read yourself. So, yeah.
Originally, the candidate the people liked, his name was Ousmane Sonko, who's the mentor of Faye. So he was originally in the running, but a conviction, he got barred him from being able to run.
Right. So
there's a speech going around, and it's been captioned, Senegal's new president speaks. And it was very much anti-French, like we got to free ourselves from the French.
Right.
That's Sonko in that speech. So just to clarify that, who is the mentor of the current president, Faye.
Got you.
So because people have been circulating that like the Senegal's new president speaks.
Got you.
He's not the president. But since then he has been appointed by Faye as the prime minister.
Got you.
So Faye's story goes, he was in prison. Also, Sonko was in prison. But Faye was in prison for 11 months prior to being released on March 14th, 10 days before the election.
Interesting date.
Yeah. We always remember that date because that's the birthday of our Morditat, our mother.
Yes, it is.
So we'll never forget that date. Also, fun fact, the birthday of Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But
I digress. So, yeah, that's why it was all kind of bamboozling, because he was released a mere 10 days before the election took place. And then he was voted to be president.
Yeah, he came up, man. That's a transformation I like to see.
That's the thing. Interestingly enough, the arrests of Faye and Sonko had been all to do with the protests that had been going on. Right. So I think 1,000 people were arrested. And then shortly before the election, an amnesty law was passed by Macky Sall to free everyone who was arrested, interestingly enough.
Macky Sall's the previous president, who is known as a
puppet politician. So interesting turn of events.
Yeah, very interesting.
What's interesting also is what Sonko, Faye's mentor, was convicted of was corrupting the youth. So that's the conviction they put on him to prevent him from running. So once he knew he couldn't run, he said, okay, I back Faye, everyone vote for him. So Faye was really what allowed him to be elected, was the support of the youth. Sonko has garnered a lot of support. So it was really through his word, Faye got a lot of support. And I think, he won the vote by 57%. So it was quite a landslide. And it was down namely to the youth, which I think 60% of Senegal are under 25. So a lot of youth there. So they backed, because they're part of the same party, obviously Sonko being his mentor. So they back the ideals of that party.
There you go.
So it will be interesting to see how this unfolds. Faye is Senegal's youngest elected president. He's the youngest elected president on the African continent, apparently. So he's 44, so quite young. And what differs in other cases of this one is, well, pretty much the vote was done through election, through the ballot. So it was done through the voting system rather than a coup. And it was interesting. I was watching the African historian speak. Now I'm seeing my notes. What I want to speak on as well is that Faye, some of his ideals, before I get onto the voting thing. So some of the things he wants to do in his presidency is tackle corruption. He's ditching the CFA franc, which is the currency within Senegal, pegged to the euro. So he wants to ditch that and work towards financial sovereignty. He wants economic sovereignty. He wants to reform ECOWAS, which is interesting. No one's really said that in terms of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. They've left ECOWAS.
They just left it, right.
Yeah, so he wants to
He wants to reform it. Interesting.
I mean, but we know how dodgy ECOWAS can be. We
know firsthand how dodgy ECOWAS can be.
We know. And he wants to renegotiate oil and gas contracts. So that's what he's put forth.
Interesting.
So his biggest thing is abandoning the franc.
Yeah.
So we'll see if he gets that done. So he was elected through ballot voting, as I said. So they put forth that it was the will of the people. It was a fair vote. The people were able to vote and resulted in him being president. So when I was watching a coverage on it, what an African historian has said, he has said, this is proof we can change the situation through democratic process. But I think that's a slippery slope and an unfair narrative to put forth, because you really got to take it on a country by country basis.
Almost definitely.
Because as we pointed out in the past and past coverages, we've dealt with puppet politicians, an undue process, unfair elections. We've dealt with that across the world. So countries will assess it for themselves of whether or not a coup is required, basically.
Yeah, I hear that.
And even if we get into the definition of democratic, because I like my definition. So then I was like, well, let's get to the root of this. So democracy comes from the Greek word demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. So democracy can be thought of as power of the people, a way of governing which depends on the will of the people. So if the will of the people is being enforced, that is democracy.
Right.
And we've seen with these coups, the people look very happy.
And then people they were smiling. I saw a recent video of Ibrahim Traore with his people, and everyone just had big fat smiles on their face, like, yeah, it's about time. So, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with words like that, it's often words that the West use for their own benefits and means, when they themselves don't really operate that way. If you understand how they operate behind the scenes, no matter what picture they put forward and present to you, I say, yeah, democracy, they don't operate that way. And anytime they're losing control, they step into a situation and say, but this isn't democracy. It's just nonsense. You have to leave that to the side. But in regards to what you're saying about the African countries, Senegal, I think what we're going to see just by nature throughout this time period is it happening. What's happening will happen, and it will happen in different ways. And so pertinent to the time that we're living in, we're going to see our people start to take back their power. And the reality of it is it's going to happen in different ways, whether you agree with one way and not the other, or agree with that way or not the other, or you just like both, as long as we come back to where we're supposed to be.
Exactly that. And that, I will add, is it's still early days in terms of Senegal's president anyway. So let's not get too excited.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
It looks promising, the ideals, but as we say, even we said with Burkina Faso, okay, it wasn't just a coup and then stuff. Then it's like, oh, what do we do now? Yeah, stuff has been happening.
Exactly.
There was a plan.
They're building. They're specifically trying to elevate and liberate the people, and you can see by what's happened since. So we said it when they took over. We said, okay, let's see what they do next, because it's clear something's wrong, because these leaders appear to be puppet leaders. So when they're removed, you can't really look at that and say, that's a bad thing. You have to look at that and say, okay, what's going to happen next? And if you look at how Ibrahim Traore is moving, you see that they're trying to elevate and liberate the country. They're building, they're trying to make connections and deals. They're trying to say, listen, this is our land, we control it. And anyone who looks at that and says that it's wrong, make no mistake, there's a reason that they say that. And it's not because it's wrong. It's because they understand what it means and what the rise of this country means for them. So they're looking at it and saying, no, that's not right. Pay no mind, because we're going to rise. It's just how we're going to rise. Okay? Only thing that I always add is that it's pertinent and paramount that we understand who we are spiritually, as well as understand who we are physically. That makes sense. So the spiritual science that we dive into, and us acknowledging who we are and who our overseers are, is also a part of it. Tuning into our ancestors, our overseers, is also a part of it. And every other race does that. They know who seeded them here, and they know who to call on when they require help. Exactly
that. So yeah, that was pretty much, those are my two biggest things to talk on. Then I just have a few smaller things, but it's interesting turn of events Interesting turn of events.
Yeah, things are happening. That's what I will say. Things are happening. Gotta keep watching, right?
Keep watching.
Keep watching. Just had the eclipse.
Yeah.
Just had the eclipse.
Eclipse, conjunction. There was a whole lot going on. A comet was around.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot happening.
There's a lot happening lately. And even through the whole month of March, I just felt like there was a lot going on spiritually.
Yeah. If you can feel a lot, if you're sensitive to the energies, you'll feel like something's happening, and it's because something is happening, right? So it's just why now is the time to wake up. Now is the time to wake up. So yeah, there's so much to speak about. I don't want to go off too much, but it's so pertinent what you're speaking about here. So pertinent, us tracing back to our roots. We're going to continue along the creation theme of episodes as well, and talk about where we come from. Oh yeah.
We were just talking. There's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about. So yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just see what happens for Senegal. But yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. When terms are thrown around like democracy and democratic process, just really look at, what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And an interesting point to point out is when the coup happened in Niger, it happened in July. It took the US until October to declare it a coup. So if they really so strongly cared about democratic process, they would have they would have been on that. But they was just weighing up their options and what they're going to get out of things.
Exactly. And that's what they're looking at. How can we make this work? And then by October, they was like, nah, say it's a coup.
They don't look like they're going to listen to us.
Yeah, so it's a coup now. It's where it is. When you talk about how they put people in power in the first place, what do they call that? When they go in and install their leaders in that unruly, what's that called? Mm-hmm. Don't fall for it.
Don't fall for the trickery of their terminology and laws.
Exactly.
But yes, moving on from that, so we covered Niger kicking out US and then Senegal's new president. One quick one to note is Zimbabwe has launched a new currency.
Yeah, I saw that.
Backed by gold called the ZiG.
The ZiG, yeah. That's interesting. I'm going to keep watching that, actually.
Keep watching that.
It's
early days, so we'll see. Mm-hmm. But they launched this new currency to combat inflation of 55%. Zim gold, or Zimbabwe gold, called ZiG, is backed by the country's gold, precious metals, and foreign currency reserves worth $285 million. The banks are to convert all Zimbabwe dollars balances to new currency, and the ZiG will be legal tender alongside the US dollar. And the country has struggled with inflation since the West imposed sanctions 20 years ago.
There you go. So what did I say before? So every time a country's in struggle, trace it back, and somewhere at some point you're going to find the West where they're like, oops, you got us. They were there. They are always there at some point. I'm telling you.
What was that thing in Rush Hour? It was like follow the money of the rich white man or something.
Oh yeah. Chris Tucker. Follow the rich white man or follow the money. You always find a rich white man. Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, something.
But yeah, he's absolutely right.
So yeah, just keep an eye on the ZiG and what's going on in the currency world. Mm-hmm. It's all very interesting. We won't know where it's going to rank in terms of worth. The IMF said they're still, looking at it. Not the Impossible Mission Force. The International Monetary Fund.
Every time you say IMF, I picture Tom Cruise sprinting hard. He's got that sprint. It's serious to him when he's running. It's not a game. It's not a joke. When he's running, he's going somewhere.
He takes his movie seriously.
Yeah. Not that IMF.
Okay, just a couple more. This we would have seen in recent months. Idris Elba is looking to build a smart eco-city off the coast of Sierra Leone. So
that's we got personal connection.
We're from Sierra Leone.
We got Sierra Leone heritage
on our mother's side. We're always like, oh, okay.
yeah. Always looking there to see what's happening. When I saw that, I thought, that's what we need to do. Us and our people need to say, you know what, we're gonna go and build our home nations, right? I think Bubba was recently speaking about that in an update where he mentioned that, if you're smart and you're in America and you're rich, and I'm putting that in quotes again, you go back and invest in the motherland, if that makes sense. And so that's really where we need to go. I can't remember. I read it somewhere. I can't remember if it was Baba or we were speaking amongst each other.
No, yeah, he was saying, people smart, they're going to invest in motherland.
Yeah, they were. So you go invest in motherland. So to see us that actually happening, because oftentimes we speak about it, or well, it's happening. It's ideas right now with Idris Elba, or has he actually made moves?
He's making moves because, well, if I read the bullet points, it's not started construction, but he's in talks with different businesses, and they know who's the investors and who's gonna.
Okay.
So Elba is acquainted with the area as his father was born in the country, and the actor became a citizen himself after a visit in 2019. And Elba's quoted as saying, "It's about being self-reliant. It's about bringing an economy that feeds itself and has growth potential. I'm very keen to reframe the way Africa is viewed as an aid model. This opportunity is completely different." Elba was brought into the project by his childhood friend, Sayaka Stevens, the grandson of a former Sierra Leonean president of the same name. So this eco-city will include wind and solar farms, which will have 5 wind turbines and an array of solar panels and battery storage. This is an exciting prospect for Sierra Leone, where only 28% of the population currently has access to electricity.
Yeah, so there you go, which is why we need to go back home and invest and elevate it. And that's why I always speak about it. We liberate ourselves when we liberate our home continent, right? We're Africans. We can't, as we say in our tones, we can't ever escape that. We should never want to escape that. That is who we are. We're the first world people. And that's where we come from. So that's where we were seeded. And so that's where we have to go back. So it's always nice to hear those stories, and you just want people to follow through. And then if you have the opportunity to support, you support, if that makes sense. Even on that note, I read something else recently about there's a football player actually called Rudiger, plays for Real Madrid, and I'm pretty sure he plays for the German national team. But if you throw up his picture right now, you'll see that he is not German. So he also has Sierra Leone heritage, and he was speaking about going back and investing in his home country, and creating jobs and creating and elevating the standard there, if that makes sense. So these are beautiful places. You go and you see, and as well, it's so important as well to change the perception as well in terms of what he spoke about, because these are beautiful places, and that's one thing that we're starting to really see hammered home about the continent. Whereas in previous decades, they tried to make it out like Africa was just not, I don't know, mud and no, these are beautiful places. And you talk about Syria, Ghana, Nigeria, I'll throw in there as well, many other places, and Zimbabwe. What was I looking at? I was
looking at Gabon one time.
Yeah, Gabon. I think it was Gabon. There's pictures. It's beautiful places. And so we want to change the perception as well, but we also want to go home and we want to build it up. And so if you're in the West and you have what you will call finance, take it back to the homeland, because if it's here within reach of the devil, he will come for it.
He gonna grab that.
Because
what they don't know is the West, America particularly, broke.
Yeah, they're broke, man. So they did. Baba told us that right. They're grabbing back. They're like, no, we're going to take that back. All these Negroids that we made rich, we need to take that back.
We're going to need that back.
We're going to need that back right now. So, yeah, go take it back home. Invest it back home, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, Rudiger, he was talking about the same thing about how he wants to go home and he wants to invest. So it's just good to hear those. It's good to hear that.
It's really good.
That mentality, that's what required, regardless of the fact that he's playing for the German national team. Yeah, it's good to hear. It's good to hear.
So before we move on, just got one last thing on Idris Elba. Reading this all actually brought to mind, the other month I was watching him on Trevor Noah's podcast. And it was quite an interesting conversation. There was one part where they were speaking on the continent of Africa and what he wants to do next career-wise. And he says a lot of his focus is within building up the continent of Africa, and he wants to do a lot of his work there now. And his big interest is African cinema. He thinks it has great potential. And what he feels is the movie Black Panther demonstrated that there is a want for Afro-futuristic movies, which I agree it very much did. And then it got me thinking, as much as the movie Black Panther was based on our culture, traditions, our language, our music, the continent of Africa didn't see any benefit from it.
Right.
So that is an important one, to funnel movies about our culture through the people of our culture and the continent of our culture.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that is an important one, because when you're dealing with cinema, that's imagery and can give us a sense of pride.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a fundamental part. Imagery is a fundamental part of our culture. Displaying things on display, whether you're talking about big cinema, but certain things were always on display, whether it's our dance, our drums, so on and so forth. Our culture is very much that. So yeah, not only good to hear of that talk, but also acknowledging the fact that we need to tell our own stories as well. Because one thing that we said at the time when Marvel brought out the movie is that the movie was positive in a lot of ways, but it's still a story that's controlled by their machine, if that makes sense. So you can never rely on that story being the full or the highest level of imagery and elevation that we require as a people, if that makes sense. So hence you look at certain things in Black Panther and you're like, what's going on? And then you watch the second movie and you look at that and you're looking like, what's going on? Where these underwater Mexicans with
extreme abilities
and vibranium that can't be stopped, where they come from? I thought we was that guy. And so I remember we mentioned it even in the first movie at the end when he opened up the country, and he opened up the country and said, well, now we're going to start to invite others in and do it and so on and so forth. And the reality of that is, if that was a reality, if that makes sense, if it wasn't a movie, is that you could never do that without the Western countries, which I guess they illustrated a little bit in the second movie, saying, no, we want control of that resources. We're not prepared to accept that you are in control of those resources. We want control of it, and how dangerous it is to start letting them in, if that makes sense. And just on that point, not to keep going, but when you look at Wakanda and the way that I know it's fictional, so to speak, and the way that it prospered based on its resources, based on the meteorite bringing in vibranium, you have to also look at Congo and ask the question, how would Congo benefit if it controlled its own resources? What would Congo look like if the Congolese people controlled those vast resources? Because
yeah, exactly. Resources. Someone said Congo is Wakanda in real life. In real life. The potential of its abilities, and I think even in talking about past leaders, the first president of Ghana post-colonialism, Kwame Nkrumah, he wrote a book about Congo and its potential.
Yes, he did.
The resources, the river within Congo has the, what's the word I'm looking for? The hydroelectricity. The hydroelectricity garnered within that river makes it capable of powering the whole continent.
There you go.
The whole continent.
There you go.
The farmland could feed everyone within Congo. The resources are abundant. No, exactly what you're saying. Not even to cut you. If you had more. It's very important to the continent, and that's why it's been so violently exploited.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So I don't even need to say anything. Exactly. So we as a people need to understand and overstand why Congo is going through what it's going through. It's because of what it can do for us, what it can do for the Congolese people and us as a people in general. And that is why it's so heavily concentrated on. That is why they do not want it liberated. Trust me. And so you have to understand that story. Don't just look at it and say, oh, that's terrible. Understand why it is that way, if that makes sense, and any other story that matches it. But 100%. And you look at the resources, they're vast. So it could literally be that real life version, if you like, of Wakanda, but they're not going to want that.
They're not going to want that.
They're not going to want that. So yeah, but it's good to hear about that. I think we do need to tell our stories, put our stories on display, imagery, culture. That's what we're about. We're a people of life and soul. That's what we do. So it's good to hear.
And it's good to hear, with the success he's achieved, he's still concerned about the continent of Africa and his heritage.
Of course.
And stuff like that. That's important for us all to have that mentality of being concerned about back home.
Exactly. We have to.
Exactly that. So lastly, that was pretty much all of my headlines on Africa being on the rise, and we'll just keep an eye on what's going on in the continent. But I want to give a quick mention to an interesting story. So there's this company called Grassfields, isn't it? So it was a African-owned company. And I used to buy from there all the time.
Yeah. We had the tops on sometimes.
Yeah, even the African
print. Yeah.
The African print.
Yeah.
We had that on. But there was a period in time where the company was stolen from the founders, which I did like their story. They're two twin sisters from Cameroon. Started with nothing, built the company up to be worth £1 million. Well, yeah, £1 million company. So, yeah, there was a point sometime last year, or maybe time gets lost, but they were speaking out on social media about their company being stolen from them. So at that point, I stopped buying stuff. I was like, oh no, if it ain't them, I ain't buying. So even someone asked us where we got the tops from. I had to be like,
oh yeah, that's right, they did.
There's another company you could shop on that.
Yeah, I hear you.
I don't know what's going on there. Yeah. And especially as I found out it being stolen anyway, I was like, But it was non-Africans who took over the company, Indian, I believe.
Yeah.
So they were speaking out about that. It's been a long road, but I thought I'd just keep up with the former owners at the time, because I liked their ideals. Everything was manufactured in Africa. They were employing Africans, so I liked those ideals. So recently they actually got the company back, interestingly enough. So now, and I thought that was a positive thing, because they've launched a campaign where they want to employ 1 million Africans by 2050.
Okay, interesting.
So, just check that out and you'll see what you think. But I do like their ideals of employing Africans. And even I was watching their live video they did recently, and they were like, yeah, we just really want to build up our continent. We, coming from Africa, have seen the struggles. It could be a whole lot easier for us if we just got stuff manufactured in China. But why are we going to do that when the capability is in Africa? We just got to build it up and have patience.
Yeah, I can respect that.
And not make everything about money.
I can respect that. Because that is fundamentally what we're missing sometimes, is that long-term perspective on things. So we've seen so little money in recent times that sometimes we see a little bit and we're like, yeah, let me just grab that for myself and I'll be okay. And sometimes you have to have that long-term perspective of, wait, if I don't use my opportunity to play my role in our elevation, then when will we ever elevate? And so we're always speaking about that long-term. Every time we look at a business or we look at our culture, well, it's long-term. Can we help not just us, but the generation after us, people far and wide, the generation after them, the generation after them? Can we put things in place to help a wide range of us and not just succeed as an individual where you might get a quick buck, if that makes sense? So that's good to hear. Yeah,
so I thought that was a positive one to throw in there as well. So
yeah, I'll check that out.
Yeah, keep up with that. But I think they're relaunching their store soon, so we'll see how that goes.
Keep an eye on it.
Yeah, there was it's iffy opinion surrounding the whole thing, but you know what? I said I'm gonna stick by my people and see how this goes.
Yeah. So sometimes we got to stick by our people in certain situations because other races do as well. And I don't mean that to say that we don't point out, and this is separate to them. With them, you got to look at it and be like, well, let me just stick by them. Let me, give them the benefit of the doubt, because they're our people. But in other situations, you do have to acknowledge when there's devils amongst you. And I always got to make that point, because I started thinking about experiences. I'd be like, the devils were there tearing us down. Yeah, you always have to acknowledge them.
Yeah, that's why I always look at ideals and actions, which is one thing I meant to say earlier, even with the Senegalese president, it being earlier days. Promises are all well and good. We got to measure it over actions, because actions make the world go round and round.
Indeed.
So at least these people, I can say, well, they've employed Africans, they've stuck to that, those ideals as far as that goes. So yeah, they piqued my interest. I think that's a good initiative, trying to employ 1 million Africans by 2050. So we'll keep an eye on that.
Indeed. And important what you say about ideals as well, because you don't get caught up on the person, but you look at the mission, the ideals, what's actually going on. Then, like we see in the situation in Senegal, even if that person is rendered that they can no longer do the job, someone else is there to do that same job, if that makes sense. Because we saw the Senegal president or prime minister couldn't take the role because of whatever convictions, this, that, and the other.
Yeah,
but someone else was right there to take the role, because the ideals matter, not always the individual. And so we shouldn't get too caught up on individuals, if that makes sense. It's really what we do and what we support as a unit, because if enough of us want it, we will have it, if that makes sense. There's a line actually that I'll just end on in terms of that subject. Who you are, know what you accept. I think it's the same book. And what Baba Yaanuwn says, he says, when the unintelligent in a race outnumber the intelligent in a race, that race is on its way to extinction. So we have to make sure that the intelligent outnumber the unintelligent. The unintelligent will be there, but if we outnumber them, then that race is on its way to progress and salvation, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'll make that point.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So yeah, I quite enjoyed that episode. I think we touched on many different facets of it. And what I will say is Africa is on the rise regardless. We can look at the finer details of things or what's going on there. It's that person about it. But this can't be stopped.
Yeah.
Africa is on the rise regardless.
Yeah, it can't be stopped just as much as you can't stop summer from coming round every year. This is a part of nature. And so what's happening is literally that. We're entering in a summer period, if you like, of existence, and where the children of the sun are going to rise. If that makes sense. So,
absolutely. Yeah. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Subscribe if you haven't already and you like what you see or heard, because you can follow us on the audio platforms, subscribe, leave a review, leave comments on YouTube. If there's someone you feel would be interested in this information, share it with them. You know, spread the information. Of course, we're very proud to represent our master teacher, to represent our culture. But the information in general, no matter what walk of life you decide to take, is important. It's important to know what's happening in this day and time. So
100%.
Share this with people who you feel may be relevant to.
100%. I echo 100%.
That. And yes, follow us on social media. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all of those. And we'll be back next week. But until now, farewell. And wadu.
Farewell and wadu.